Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we'll be grading every team's season along with giving out team awards, and I'll also be looking back on my preseason predictions, and please consider dropping a like and subscribing. If there was any year for the Buffalo Bills to finally get over the hump and make it out of the AFC and win the Super Bowl, this was the year, since their kryptonite Patrick Mahomes was not in the playoffs, but they still couldn't even make the AFC Championship in yet another disappointing postseason finish. But they did go 12-5 and had a good regular season despite not looking as dominant in past seasons, so I'll give them a C. This video is filmed and posted before the Super Bowl, so I don't know yet if the Patriots come out on top, but it's still an easy A for them, A plus for them. They went from winning 4 games last year, being below the Jets in the standings, to appearing in a Super Bowl. Mike Vrabel has completely transformed this team, and Drake May played just as good as any QB this season, breaking out and finishing second in MVP voting, barely missing out on the award. I was a lot higher on the Patriots than most, having them finish with a winning record and making the playoffs, so my hot take aged perfectly, but even I didn't see them being this good. The Dolphins won 7 games, but I don't even know how, because it felt like they were way worse than that. And the two experiment is pretty much over, even though he's still being paid a lot of money. And the future seems pretty bleak in Miami, not having very much promising young talent. But they did switch head coaches, moving on from McDaniel, but he did make it to the end of the season, so my hot take was close, but didn't fully hit, and I'll give them a D+. The Jets are an easy F, somehow doing even worse than the non-existent expectations they had entering into the season. Fields didn't work out at all, and this offense was just horrendous, with the defense not being good at all. And it was just a terrible season, and somehow they didn't even get an interception the whole year, and they still didn't even get the first pick. Breece Hall was pretty much the only bright spot on this team, so my hot take aged pretty badly, and Garrett Wilson, who played 8 games, led the team in receiving yards. I was so high on this Ravens team, and they were the Super Bowl favorites, but they just completely bombed expectations, not even making the playoffs, in a super weak year for the AFC North, and they get an easy F. Lamar was injured and didn't really look like his normal self, and still had no receiving help, and had a rough O-line. And I thought they were going to be far and away the best offense in the league, but that just wasn't the case. And the defense significantly regressed, having no pass rush, and the secondary wasn't great either. The Steelers had another classic 9-8, 10-7, getting blown out in the first round of the playoffs gimmick again under Mike Tomlin. And I'll give them a C because not many people expected them to win double-digit games and the division. But with the moves they made in the offseason, it seemed like the message was anything less than a playoff win's a failure, which is what this season was again for Steelers. And my hot take aged perfectly with TJ Watt really regressing, and I should have went even lower. The Bengals had another disappointing year, looking like they'll never even get close to a Super Bowl again with Joe Burrow, and the defense was just historically bad. And for some reason, people keep hyping them up every year, but they disappointed greatly again, only winning a measly 6 games, earning an F. The Browns' defense returned to being elite, but the offense couldn't be further from the polar opposite, struggling all year, with poor QB play, bad O-line, and no receivers. They did absolutely nail the draft with easily the best draft class in the NFL, so the future could be bright there, and I'm going to give them a C, but the record was bad, but I saw a lot of things I liked from this team. The Texans had the best defense in the NFL, but the offense struggled with Stroud continuing to struggle all season, and really struggled in the playoffs along with the O-line not being good and having a non-existent run game. I'm going to give them a B because they did win a playoff game and went on a 9-game win streak at the end of the season after a rough start. But the offense was just not good enough to go further than that. It's hard to know what to make of the Colts season because they were the best team in football for a good amount of the year. But then Daniel Jones got hurt and it just all went downhill from there, going on a 7-game losing streak to end the season finishing with 8 wins. I'll give them a B since they barely had any expectations, but they also just completely collapsed the second half. But they did exceed expectations with 8 wins, and losing Daniel Jones hurt really bad. Even though it didn't end in a way they would have liked, the Jaguars still get an A, because they crushed expectations along with mine, winning 13 games. Lawrence finally broke out, boosting the offense, and I thought the defense was going to be horrible, but they were top 10 in points per game, along with the offense, and the future looks bright in Jacksonville under Liam Cohen, doing a complete 180 with the Jaguars. And my hot take aged perfectly, with Parker Washington breaking out this year and being one of the most underrated receivers in the league. The Titans were awful and are getting a D. They're bottom 5 on both sides of the ball, only averaging 16.7 points per game. Cam Ward didn't have a great rookie year, but did show some potential towards the end of the year, and he also has really nothing to work with out there. The Broncos won 14 games despite not being very dominant at all, and made the AFC Championship and played it without Bo Nix, where things could have gone differently if he was not injured. The offense was just average, and they got carried by their elite defense. And I'll give them an A because they're expected to be a fringe playoff team, and for what was a pretty hot take at the time, considering the Chiefs' recent success, I nailed this take, and they're my dark horse team entering the year. The Chiefs came into the year appearing in 7 straight AFC championships and didn't even make the playoffs, only winning 6 games, with the one-score games just not going their way. They went on a 6-game losing streak at the end of the season, with Mahomes tearing his ACL, and they get an F since they went from Super Bowl to top 10 pick. The Chargers had a solid year, winning 11 games, but everyone knew they just weren't a playoff threat, and had an absolute disastrous playoff game. The defense was excellent overall, being a top 10 unit under Jesse Minter, and they were probably just as good as they were projected, maybe winning a game or two more, and they get a B-. The Raiders made a huge mistake trading and extending Geno Smith, and I was skeptical of it at the time, and I was correct in predicting he'd lead the league in picks. They were also last in the league in points and yards per game to show how bad the offense was, and they get an F, especially because they weren't expected to be this bad, and finished with the first overall pick while there were some other horrendous teams competing for it. The Eagles came off one of the most dominant Super Bowl performances ever, and the team this year was just not as good. The defense was still good even though it wasn't elite, but the offense really struggled. Hurts was shaky all year, Saquon really took a step back, and Kevin Patullo was just not good. They did handily win the NFC East and won 11 games, but a first-round exit after winning a Super Bowl earns them a C. The Cowboys were a tale of two teams relating to both sides of the ball, with the offense being incredible and Dak being really good, along with Pickens and CeeDee Lamb being amazing. And I was dead wrong about George Pickens falling off a cliff. And they had a pretty solid run game with Javonte Williams emerging, but the defense was just abysmal, and they were last in points per game allowed, and I'll give them a C-. The Commanders went from being in the NFC Championship to winning 5 games, so this one's an easy F. I knew they regressed, but I didn't expect it to be this bad, and Daniel struggled with injuries and had a sophomore slump, along with not having much surrounding him on offense, and the defense was horrible. The Giants were a little bit better than their 4 wins suggest, and they kept most games pretty close. Jackson Dart played well and exceeded my expectations, even though I'm not fully sold on him yet, and they have some really good young pieces on offense. The defense was actually the Giants' weak spot for what was projected as a solid unit, but they could not stop the run at all, which is what they were supposed to be able to do, and I'm going to give them a D+. The Lions went from winning 15 games last season to barely finishing above 500, so they get an F. The offense was really good, having a great pass and run game. Defensively, they weren't great but not terrible, and they were also injured. They did play in a stacked division where I predicted every team would go above 500, which did happen, and losing their coordinators really hurt them. The Packers' season ended in a disappointing fashion, blowing a huge lead to the Bears in the playoffs. They also lost Micah Parsons, which was a huge loss for the defense and pretty much ended their season. The offensive and defensive units are slightly above average, and I'm going to give them a B-. The Vikings, moving on from Sam Darnold and rolling with J.J. McCarthy as the starter, proved to be a huge mistake, and the offense was bad with no pass or run game. The defense was very good, and they did end the season on a 5-game win streak, turning the season from an absolute disaster to a 500 record. I'll give them a C- because there was expected regression, but they still had a rough year, and shout out Will Reichard. The Bears went from 5 wins to winning a tough NFC North and making it to the divisional round. Caleb Williams just kept leading improbable comebacks, and he looked great in year two, along with having a great run game and O-line. The defense wasn't really great, but they did lead the league in turnovers, but gave up a lot of points. And they get an A+ for the turnaround they had under Ben Johnson, and they did win a playoff game. That was way too high on the Buccaneers, and I'm giving them an F because they couldn't even win the division, where a winning record wasn't even necessary. The offense just couldn't put it together, and they were 18th in points per game, even though it was pretty stacked on paper, and Baker just kind of fell apart the second half, even with the stacked supporting cast, and the defense wasn't good either. The Falcons had QB troubles this year, even though they did have some solid weapons, especially Bijan, but they couldn't put it all together. The defense was alright, and this is the last season for the foreseeable future where I'm going to be high on this Falcons team. They're projected around 8 wins, so I'll give them a C. Bryce Young showed potential he could be the guy, and Rookie of the Year Tedero McMillan was a great weapon for the Panthers, and my hot take aged horribly. The offense was rough, being 27th in points and yards per game, and the defense was dead in the middle in points and yards per game, which was better than I expected. They did make the playoffs even though they didn't even need a winning record, and they did give the Rams a run for their money in the playoffs, so I'll give them a B. The Saints started out 1-8, but finished the year winning 4 out of the last 5 with Tyler Shuck taking over the offense halfway. And played well, but the offense was still pretty bad overall, but they did have a solid defense. They get a C since they weren't really expected to do anything and probably even exceeded expectations. The 49ers were plagued with injuries again this year, but were able to win a playoff game and won 12 games, so they get a B. The offense had good QB play for the most part, and McCaffrey is just incredible, having 2,000 yards from scrimmage, carrying the offense, and the defense was still average despite injuries. The Seahawks and Sam Darnold have crushed expectations this year, being second in points per game, and I didn't expect the offense to be nearly this good. And Kenneth Walker's really emerged along with JSN being a top 3 receiver. Mike McDonald was such a good hire and completely transformed the Seahawks' trajectory. And they had the number 1 defense in points per game and were all around stacked and most likely are going to win the Super Bowl. The Rams and Seahawks were far and away the top 2 teams in the NFL and faced off in the NFC Championship, which the Rams lost but still put up a good game. They had the number 1 offense in points and yards per game with MVP Matt Stafford and were all around the lead on offense. And the defense was top 10 in points per game allowed, even though they're the lowest paid defense in the league, and they get an A. The last team we have is the Cardinals, who are terrible, only winning 3 games when they're projected around 7. So this is an easy F. The pass game was okay, but the defense was bad, and it was just overall a disastrous season for the Cardinals. Thanks for watching.